Hi, I'm Paris, and you can hardly see anymore the scar on my neck from the thyroid surgery I had, about 25 years ago in Australia to remove a mysterious lump that was growing in my thyroid they thought might be cancerous. They really had to open me up ear to ear, and while the scar was still fresh, I like to tell people I'd gotten into a fight in prison and been left for dead. But it turns out the real story behind what happened to my thyroid is actually far more intriguing. Now, if you're in your late 50s or older and you have thyroid issues, this story might be of particular interest to you because it was only by complete chance, years later, that I found out what might have actually caused the problems with my thyroid. So to begin with, I'd spent several years working in Japan, saving up my money, and was traveling around the world to get my way back to the United States. I was in Australia, seeing the sights, living out of the back of an old Nissan Safari SUV, had just gotten back from Papua New Guinea, and shaving, I noticed when I ran my hand over my neck, I felt a lump there, which I promptly forgot about until about a month later, when again I noticed it, and I swore it had gotten larger. These were the days before Google, so my girlfriend who I was traveling with and myself, we looked through some traveler's health guides that we had brought on our trip around the world, and it seemed like that's where the thyroid was located. And so I proceeded to begin worrying about it as we traveled down the western coast of Australia to Perth, the big city on that side of the continent, and went to a doctor to get it checked out. He felt around on my neck and said, "Yep, you've got something growing in your thyroid. Could be something benign. Could be cancerous. We'll need to do more tests." And so the adventure began. Now, my girlfriend and I, we were in a campground out on the edge of the city. We were traveling on a budget, so we were staying in a tent. So the doctor told me he'd need to do a biopsy to get a little sample of it so they could test it and see. Well, I thought, okay, so I guess I'll have some kind of surgery and they'll take a little sample. But no, it was a needle biopsy done in the office right now, no anesthesia. And I thought, man, I'm getting on a plane back to the US where they don't do things like this. But it is fairly standard procedure. It's a very thin needle, but it sure seemed awfully long. And so he came at me with the lump right there and took a few samplings of the nodule. It really didn't hurt that much, but it's just so unpleasant to imagine. So he sent that off for examination while I waited and worried just outside of Perth in the campground. And the results came back. Inconclusive. Need to do some more testing. So he sent me to his big medical center to have a radioactive iodine test because the thyroid absorbs iodine, so they do a radioactive iodine. I'd never heard of this kind of test, but it sounded a lot more high-tech than coming at you with the biopsy needle. So I went and had that procedure. Little did I know at that time how hair of the dog that bit you sort of testing it was. And so went back to the campground, waited some more, results came in, inconclusive. So the doctor asked me, how long are you planning on staying in Australia or where are you headed off to? And we said, well, we're trying to leave Australia right now. As soon as I get the all clear, we're heading to Thailand and to India and to Bangladesh and Nepal. You probably don't want to have surgery in those countries that you mentioned, so I recommend you have surgery here. We'll take out half the thyroid, the part that has the nodule in it, and we'll see if it's cancerous. If it is, we have to take out the whole thyroid. Otherwise, we'll leave you with half your thyroid. I hadn't mentioned any of this to my family back in Seattle because I didn't want to worry them. But since I did have travel insurance, I could go to a private doctor, and he knew a really good one. And I could actually, this was like on a Thursday, I could actually have the surgery on Monday. And the next day I called my parents and told them, here's what's been going on and I'm not sure if I have cancer. I'm going to have surgery on Monday and I'll call you back and let you know how that went. I'm sure that was a rough weekend for my parents, as it was for me, but we decided we were going to get the surgery done and I was going to be fine and we were going to continue on with the trip. So we were already making plans to have our SUV put onto a ship and taken to India. Then it was Monday and thousands of miles away from home, not knowing anyone in the entire continent except for my girlfriend. I went in for my first time ever being hospitalized and to have the surgery. So I woke up, the doctor came to see me in recovery and said things were still inconclusive, but he said they'd taken my half thyroid and sent it down to pathology, but they needed a few hours to do the study. If it turned out it was cancerous, they would put me back in surgery that same day, I guess, take out the other half of the thyroid, whereas if it wasn't, then I'd get to go home. Well, go back to the tent. And thank goodness it was not cancerous. It was certainly a mystery. All the doctors I saw there questioned me on, did you have radiation treatment for sinuses when you were a child? Or they just couldn't figure out what would have triggered a healthy 30-year-old man to have this thyroid growth. I just figured, well, stuff happened, so I'm moving on. Just glad that it wasn't cancer. I did have a hard time because we left soon after, just a few days after that. The car was on the container ship going to India, and so we had a lot of luggage because we had to do a couple months before we could pick up the car. And I remember being so worried picking up the luggage that this was just going to pull loose. I also worried what people were going to think of me seeing that big scar. That's when I decided to go with the prison fight story, make it seem more interesting. Well, I finished traveling around the world, went to 27 countries in total, had more adventures, got mugged on the street, broken bones and various things in Africa, all kinds of other excitements, and I'll tell you about in other videos. But I did get back to the US eventually and took some time finding my way, deciding what I was going to do with the rest of my life. I was about 31 years old at that point. And I ended up in Washington State on the Canadian border working at a customs brokerage. And my girlfriend, who I'd traveled around the world with, ended up back in Japan. I happened to overhear a person I worked with and another woman. They were probably both a little older than me, but they were talking about their thyroid issues. It turns out both of them had to have thyroid surgery. And overhearing this, I said, hey, you know, I had thyroid surgery too when I was traveling in Australia. Nobody had any idea what the cause of it was. And one woman said, oh, you haven't heard. She asked me, where did you grow up as a young child? And I said, well, my dad was in the Navy. We lived different places, but mostly it was around Chicago. She said, ah, yeah, the Midwest, me too, her too. She asked me, were you a big milk drinker? And I said, yeah, actually, because my mother wasn't able to breastfeed and they started me on cow's milk really early. She said, mm-hmm. She said, your thyroid got messed up in the same way that's happened to so many people our age. It's as a result of the above ground nuclear tests that were done in Nevada. I told her my family never lived in Nevada. She said, yeah, but you lived in the Midwest. And after some of the above ground nuclear tests, it turned out that the prevailing winds at altitude carried the nuclear fallout from Nevada up across the Rockies and deposited it onto the ground all through the Midwest. A lot of the ground there being grass, a lot of dairy farms, a lot of cows who ate the grass with the radioactive iodine-131, which got concentrated in their milk, which was then fed to you, which got concentrated in your thyroid, which ended up causing your thyroid growths, or for a lot of people, thyroid cancers. I had to think about that a while because it was so science fiction-y, out there, conspiracy theory kind of story, until I found out that actually a number of people were aware of this, and that people who lived closer in to where the testing was actually done, called the downwinders, the government set up a program to compensate them for all the health issues they had as a result of the radiation exposure from the nuclear tests.
Nevada, USA. This is the valley where the giant mushrooms grow. More atomic bombs have been exploded on these few hundred square miles of desert than on any other spot on the globe. Within the last 2 years, 20 of these colossal blasts have echoed across the great barren stretches of the Southwest. The next day, after 0 hour, we see the reason for this concentration on the weather jar. We see its relation to the huge fact which remains after every nuclear detonation, the atomic cloud, the towering, angry ghost of the fireball.
Through the 1950s and early 1960s, there were 100 above-ground nuclear tests conducted just outside of Las Vegas. And it could be what saved me from going on to actually develop thyroid cancer was the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty in 1963, where the US and the Soviet Union agreed no more above-ground nuclear testing. Thank you, Kennedy and Khrushchev, for not blowing up the world during the Cuban Missile Crisis, for agreeing to that treaty and for saving my half thyroid, which still gets me by without any medication to this day. Down below this video, I'll link to resources about this topic if you are similarly afflicted. Also, an interesting website that calculates your risk for having an effect from the nuclear fallout. You put in information about where you lived when you were younger and how long you lived in those areas, and it calculates how much nuclear fallout radiation you are likely exposed to. You might be surprised, and who knows, you might find a possible explanation for some physical ailment you've had that you have no family history of and no other reason you can think of why you developed them. But you'll probably never know for sure, just like I can't be certain that exposure to radioactive fallout is what caused the issues with my thyroid. But for people who know me even a little, I think that story is a lot more believable than I got jacked in prison and left for dead. I'll see you on the next review.